Hi, I'm Natalia. When I was sleeping in my car in that freezing December night, watching through frost-covered windows as my own family changed the locks on the house I'd been paying for, they looked right at me and mouthed the words, "You don't live here anymore." Then they drew the curtains shut. 3 months later, when they received the eviction notice from my security company, their faces went white as the snow that had covered my windshield that terrible night. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I remember that night like it was burned into my retinas. December 15th, 2023, Millbrook, Pennsylvania. The kind of cold that cuts through every layer you're wearing and settles deep in your bones. I'd been driving around for 2 hours, trying to work up the courage to go home after what had happened at the family meeting earlier that day. See, I'd been living in the family house for 8 years, ever since Dad passed away. Not just living there, I'd been the one keeping it running, paying the mortgage when Mom's disability checks fell short, covering the repairs when the furnace died 2 winters in a row, handling the property taxes that somehow always seemed to catch everyone by surprise. My older brother Garrett and my sister Penny had moved out years ago, started their own families, but they still considered it the family home. And I was just the caretaker who happened to sleep there. That morning, Garrett had called with his serious voice. "Family meeting, today, 3 p.m. Important stuff to discuss about Mom's future." I should have known something was wrong when Penny drove down from Cleveland for it. She never came for anything unless money was involved. I pulled into the driveway that afternoon. Same driveway I'd been shoveling every winter, same steps I'd been maintaining, same house where I'd invested every spare dollar I had. But when I walked into the living room, the atmosphere felt different. Mom was sitting in her usual chair, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Garrett had papers spread across the coffee table. Penny was pacing by the window, nervous energy radiating off her like heat. "Sit down, Nat," he said, not looking up from his documents. That should have been my second warning. He never called me Nat anymore, not since he'd gotten that promotion at the insurance company and started acting like he was better than everyone else. I sat on the couch where I'd spent countless evenings watching TV with Mom, where I'd fallen asleep reading during those long months when Dad was in the hospital, where I'd planned out my entire adult life around this house, this responsibility, this family. "We've been talking," Penny began, still pacing, "about Mom's care, about the house, about the future." My stomach started to knot. Okay, what about it? Garrett finally looked up. His expression was the same one he'd worn when we were kids, and he was about to tell Mom that I had broken something valuable. "We think it's time for some changes. Mom needs more specialized care than you can provide." "I've been taking care of Mom perfectly fine," I said, my voice steady but my hands starting to shake. "She's comfortable here. This is her home." "That's the it." Penny stopped pacing and turned toward me. "It's not really her home anymore. Legally, I mean." The papers rustled as Garrett slid a document across the coffee table toward me. "Mom signed the house over to us last month, Penny and me. We're now the legal owners." The world tilted sideways. I read the document once, twice, 3 times, but the words didn't change. Transfer of ownership, effective immediately. Garrett Peterson and Penny Martinez, joint owners. No mention of Natalia Peterson anywhere. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I've been paying for this house, the mortgage, the taxes, everything, for 8 years. "And we appreciate that," Garrett said, in the tone people use when they're trying to sound reasonable while stabbing you in the back. "Really, we do. But Mom needs professional care now. We're moving her to Sunset Manor next week. It's a really nice facility." My head snapped up. "Next week? You can't just—" "We already put down the deposit. And honestly, Nat, You need to get your own life together. You're 32. You can't live with Mom forever." I wasn't living with Mom. I was taking care of her and this house and all of you when you needed it. "The house will be sold," Garrett continued like I hadn't spoken. "The equity will help pay for Mom's care. It's the responsible thing to do." I looked at Mom, really looked at her, for the first time since I'd walked in. She was staring at her hands, tears running silently down her cheeks. "Mom," I said softly, "is this what you want?" She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke something inside my chest. Guilt? Shame? But also resignation. "They said it was for the best, sweetheart. They said you'd understand." "When do I need to be out?" The words came out flat, emotionless, because feeling anything at that moment would have destroyed me. "We're being reasonable," Penny said. "You have until the end of the month. 2 weeks.
2 weeks to find a place to live, to move 8 years of my life, to figure out how I was supposed to survive when every dollar I had was tied up in a house that apparently was never mine to begin with." I stood up slowly, carefully, like an old woman with brittle bones. "I see." "Nat, don't be dramatic," Garrett said. "This is business. It's not personal." I walked toward the front door, my front door, the door I'd painted 3 times and weatherproofed every fall. At the threshold, I turned back one last time. 8 years, I said quietly. 8 years of my life, my money, my future. And you're telling me it's not personal? Penny had the grace to look uncomfortable. "You'll land on your feet. You always do." That was yesterday. Today, I drove around Millbrook for hours, trying to figure out where I was supposed to go, what I was supposed to do. Every apartment I called wanted first month, last month, and a security deposit I didn't have because all my money was in this house. Every friend I reached out to had legitimate reasons why I couldn't stay with them. Kids, small spaces, partner situations. I wasn't angry at them. I was angry at myself for not seeing this coming. As the sun set, I found myself back in the driveway. Maybe I could reason with them. Maybe we could work something out. Maybe Mom had changed her mind. But when I walked up to the front door and tried my key, it didn't work. They'd changed the locks already. I knocked loud enough to wake the neighbors. After a few minutes, the porch light came on, and I could see faces peering through the window. Garrett's face. Mom's face. Penny's face. They looked at me like I was a stranger, like I was some kind of threat. Garrett cracked the door open, but kept the chain lock engaged. "What do you want, Natalia?" "I want to come home." And I hated how small my voice sounded. "This isn't your home anymore," he said. Not unkindly, but with the firmness of someone who'd already made peace with his decision. "We told you that." "My stuff is in there. My clothes, my photos, my life." "We'll box it up and put it in the garage. You can pick it up tomorrow." "Garrett, please, it's freezing. I have nowhere to go tonight." He looked genuinely sorry for a moment. Then Penny appeared behind him. "There's a motel on Highway 9. It's not that expensive." "With what money?" I asked, my voice breaking despite my efforts to stay calm. "That's not our problem anymore," Penny said, and those words hit me like a physical blow. Garrett started to close the door, then paused. "Nat, for what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this." The door closed, the deadbolt turned, and I stood there on the porch I'd swept 1,000 times, staring at the welcome mat I'd bought with my own money, listening to the sounds of my family moving around inside the house I'd called home for 8 years. That's when I walked back to my car, climbed in, and started the engine. Not to leave. I had nowhere to go. Just to run the heater so I wouldn't freeze to death. I sat there for 3 hours, watching my breath fog up the windows, listening to the radio play Christmas songs about families coming together and homes full of love. Every once in a while, I'd see a curtain move in the house, someone checking to see if I was still there. Around midnight, when the cold was seeping through the car's heating system and my DAS gauge was getting dangerously low, I made a decision. Not about where I was going to sleep, I still didn't know that, but about who I was going to become. I pulled out my phone and started making a list. Every contractor I had hired over the years, every security system installer I had met through work, every connection I had in the industry that had been building quietly in the background while I was busy being the responsible daughter, the dutiful sister, the family caretaker. Because sitting in that car, watching my family sleep comfortably in the house I had paid for, I realized something that would change everything. I might not have had a home anymore, but I had skills, I had connections, and I had a burning motivation to make sure that what happened to me never happened to anyone else. I also realized something else, something that made a cold smile spread across my face despite the circumstances. They might think they were done with me, but I was just getting started with them. 3 months later, when my security company served them with that eviction notice, I would remember this moment, this car, this cold, this betrayal. And I would remember how it felt to lose everything to the people who were supposed to love me most. Because that's when I learned that family isn't about blood or shared last names or childhood memories. Family is about who shows up when everything falls apart.
And sometimes you have to build that family yourself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I woke up in my car with frost covering every window, my neck twisted at an angle that sent shooting pain down my spine, and the kind of bone-deep cold that makes you question every decision that led you to that moment. My phone was dead, my gas tank was nearly empty, and when I tried to start the car, it made that grinding sound that meant the battery was giving up, just like everything else in my life. I sat there for a moment, watching my breath create small clouds in the frigid air, and felt something I'd never experienced before: complete and utter helplessness. Not the kind of helplessness you feel when you're stressed about bills or worried about a job, the kind that comes when you realize you have absolutely nowhere to turn, no safety net, no backup plan. Through the frost on my windshield, I could see the house, my house, the house where I'd lived for 8 years, where I'd built what I thought was my future, where my family was probably having breakfast in the kitchen I'd renovated with my own hands. I tried to scrape some ice off the inside of the windshield with my credit card. Ironic, since that card was maxed out from all the house repairs I'd been covering, when I heard the familiar rumble of Garrett's truck starting up in the driveway. He backed out slowly, deliberately not looking in my direction, even though my car was parked right there on the street. For a second, I thought about getting out, walking over, trying one more time to make him understand what they were doing to me. But something about the way he kept his eyes straight ahead, the way he drove past like I was invisible, made me realize the truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a family crisis that would resolve itself if I just found the right words or the right approach. This was intentional. They had planned this. They had discussed it, decided on it, and executed it with the kind of cold efficiency you use when you're dealing with a problem, not a person. 20 minutes later, Penny's white SUV pulled out of the garage. She did look at me, just for a moment, and I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe. Or pity. But then she looked away and drove off, probably heading back to Cleveland, back to her comfortable life, leaving me here to figure out how to survive what they'd done. That's when my phone buzzed. 1% battery left, but enough for a text message. Nat, your stuff is in the garage. Take it and go. We'll be back at 3 p.m. and expect you gone by then. This is hard for everyone. Please don't make it harder. G. I stared at that message until my phone died completely. Hard for everyone. Like I was some kind of burden they were all suffering through together. Like being betrayed, abandoned, and made homeless was just an inconvenience I was selfishly inflicting on them. I got out of the car, my joints protesting from the cold and the cramped sleeping position, and walked around to the garage. They'd left it unlocked, and inside I found my life reduced to 4 cardboard boxes and 2 garbage bags. 8 years of my life. My clothes, my books, my photos, my documents, everything that proved I'd have existed in that house, in that family, crammed into containers like I was moving out of a college dorm. I opened one of the boxes and found my framed photo of Dad and me at my college graduation. He'd been so proud that day, telling everyone who would listen that his daughter was going to be an engineer, that she was going to build things that mattered. In the photo, we're both smiling, both looking toward a future that felt bright and possible. I almost threw the frame against the garage wall, almost let myself have that moment of rage and destruction. Instead, I carefully wrapped it in an old sweatshirt and placed it back in the box. Because even though my family had given up on me, I wasn't going to give up on the memory of the one person who had truly believed in me. Loading those boxes into my car was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Not physically. They weren't that heavy. But emotionally, it felt like loading my own coffin. Each box represented another piece of my life that I was going to have to carry around with me. Homeless. Looking for somewhere that would take me in. As I was loading the last bag, Mrs. Chen from next door came out to get her mail. We'd always been friendly. I'd shoveled her walkway every winter, helped her carry groceries when her arthritis was bad. She saw me loading my car and walked over. "Natalia, honey, what's going on? Are you moving?"
I could have lied. Could have said I was just taking some things to storage, that everything was fine. But looking at her kind face, at this woman who had been more of a neighbor to me than my own siblings had been family, I couldn't find the energy for pretense. "They sold the house," I said simply. "I have to leave." Her face went through several expressions: confusion, concern, and then something that looked like understanding. "Where are you going to stay?" "I don't know yet." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her calculating something in her head. Then she said, "I have that small apartment above my garage. It's not much, but it's warm. You could stay there for a few days while you figure things out." For the first time in 24 hours, I felt something other than despair. "Mrs. Chen, I can't pay rent right now. All my money was tied up in—" I gestured toward the house. "Who said anything about rent?" she said firmly. "You've been a good neighbor to me for years. Let me be a good neighbor to you." I almost cried right there in the driveway. Almost broke down completely at the simple act of human kindness from someone who owed me nothing, while my own family had left me with less than nothing. "Just for a few days," I managed to say, "until I can figure out what comes next." She patted my arm. "Stay as long as you need, honey. Nobody should have to sleep in their car." As we were talking, I noticed something that made my stomach clench. There was a "for sale" sign in the front yard of my house. Not just any sign, a sign from Riverside Realty, the most expensive agency in Millbrook. They weren't just kicking me out, they were already moving forward with selling the house I'd spent 8 years investing in, improving, caring for. And they were using the premium agency, which meant they expected to get top dollar for it. Mrs. Chen followed my gaze and made a small, disgusted sound. "That went up yesterday afternoon, right after you left in your car." Yesterday afternoon. While I was still driving around town, desperately trying to figure out where I could afford to live, they were already calculating how much profit they were going to make from my 8 years of sacrifice. "They listed it for $450,000, Mrs. Chen continued, her voice tight with disapproval. "That's a lot more than your father paid for it back in the day." $450,000. I did the math in my head quickly. Dad had bought the house for $180,000. I'd put at least another $100,000 into it over the years. New roof, updated electrical, refinished hardwood floors, renovated kitchen and bathrooms. Plus, I'd been paying the mortgage, which was down to about $60,000. They were looking at a profit of over $200,000, money that represented my labor, my investment, my future, being split between two people who had contributed nothing except signing their names on a piece of paper. Standing there in that driveway, surrounded by boxes that contained the remnants of my life, looking at that for sale sign that represented my family's final betrayal, I felt something shift inside me. Not just anger, though there was plenty of that. Something colder, more focused. They thought they were done with me. They thought they could just erase me from their lives and profit from everything I'd built. They thought I would quietly disappear, maybe send a Christmas card once a year, maybe show up for funerals when I was older. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I'd spent my entire adult life being the responsible one, the caretaker, the peacekeeper. I'd swallowed my pride and my anger 1,000 times to keep the family together. I'd sacrificed my own dreams and my own future because I thought that's what love looked like. But they just taught me a lesson I would never forget. Sometimes love is one-sided. Sometimes family is just a word people use to manipulate you. And sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you most need protection from. Mrs. Chen helped me carry my boxes up to the small apartment above her garage. It was tiny, just a studio with a kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was clean and warm and safe. More importantly, it was offered with genuine kindness, something I hadn't experienced from my own family in longer than I cared to remember. As I unpacked my few belongings, I found something I'd forgotten I had, a business card from a security company installer named Jake Rodriguez. I'd met him 6 months ago when I'd hired him to upgrade the security system at the house. We'd gotten to talking during the installation, and he'd mentioned that he was thinking about starting his own company, but needed someone with project management experience to help him get it off the ground. At the time, I'd been flattered, but not interested. I had my job at the engineering firm, I had my responsibilities with the house and mom. I had a life that felt stable and predictable. Now, sitting in Mrs. Chen's garage apartment with everything I owned fit into a space smaller than my old bedroom, that business card looked like something else entirely. It looked like possibility.
That night, I plugged in my phone and called Jake Rodriguez. When he answered, I could hear noise in the background, music, laughter, the sounds of a normal Friday evening. Jake, this is Natalia Peterson. We met when you installed the security system on Maple Street. Natalia! Yeah, I remember you. How's it going? I looked around the tiny apartment, at the boxes I hadn't finished unpacking, at the window that looked directly at the house where my family was probably watching TV without giving me a second thought. It's going, I said. Listen, you mentioned once that you were thinking about starting your own security company. Yeah, I've been saving up, making plans. Why? I think I might be interested in that project management position we talked about. There was a pause. Really? I thought you were settled at your engineering job. Things change, I said, and felt the truth of those words settle into my bones. When can we meet to talk about it? How about tomorrow morning? I'll buy you coffee and we can go over the business plan. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of that small space and felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not for revenge, not yet. Just hope that maybe this disaster could become something else. Maybe losing everything I thought I wanted would help me find something I actually needed. Outside, snow started to fall again, covering the for sale sign in front of the house I'd called home. By morning, it would be white and clean, like a fresh start. I had no idea then that this phone call, this conversation, this moment of desperate reaching out would eventually become the foundation of everything that followed. But sometimes the best decisions are made when you have no other choice. Sometimes rock bottom becomes the solid foundation you never knew you needed. Saturday morning came with the kind of bitter January cold that makes your nostrils freeze when you breathe. I met Jake at Murphy's Diner on the edge of town, a place where truckers and construction workers grabbed coffee before dawn shifts. The kind of place where nobody asked questions and everybody minded their own business. Jake was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a laptop open and papers spread across the table. He looked up when I walked in, and I could see him taking in my appearance, the clothes I'd slept in, the fact that I looked like I hadn't slept in days, the general air of someone whose life had recently exploded. "Rough night?" he asked as I slid into the booth across from him. "Rough week," I said, accepting the coffee the waitress poured without asking. "Tell me about this business plan." For the next 2 hours, Jake walked me through his vision. He'd been working for other security companies for 8 years, watching them make the same mistakes over and over. Poor customer service, overpriced systems, technicians who treated clients like they were doing them a favor instead of providing a service. "The thing is," he said, pulling up spreadsheets on his laptop, "there's a huge market gap in residential security. Everyone's focused on commercial contracts because they think that's where the money is. But residential clients are more loyal, more likely to refer friends and family, and there's way less competition." I listened, asked questions, and felt my brain starting to work in ways it hadn't in months. Not just the emotional survival mode I'd been operating in, but the analytical, problem-solving part of my mind that had gotten me through engineering school and 8 years in project management. "What's your biggest obstacle?" I asked, without hesitation. "Startup capital and credibility. I've got the technical skills and some savings, but I need someone who can handle the business side. Someone who can make clients feel confident we're not just another fly-by-night operation." I sipped my coffee and studied his numbers. They were conservative, but realistic. More importantly, they showed he'd actually thought this through instead of just having a vague dream about being his own boss. "What kind of partnership are you thinking?" 50-50, he said immediately. "Equal investment, equal responsibility, equal profit sharing. I handle installations and technical support. You handle client relations, project management, and business development." I was quiet for a long moment, thinking. 50-50 partnerships could be disasters if the people involved weren't compatible. But looking at Jake's work, his planning, his straightforward approach to the conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Excitement about the future. "I don't have startup capital right now," I said honestly. "My financial situation just became complicated." He nodded like he'd already assumed that. "What do you have?" 8 years of project management experience, a network of contractors and suppliers from renovating I corrected myself, from renovating a house, a degree in engineering, and a very strong motivation to succeed. "That last one might be the most important," he said with a slight smile. "What happened to your financial situation, if you don't mind me asking?" I told him. Not everything, not the emotional devastation or the nights I'd spent crying in my car, but the facts. The house, the family meeting, the discovery that I'd been investing in something that was never really mine, the sudden homelessness.
When I finished, Jake was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know what I think?" "What?" "I think your family just handed you the greatest gift they could have given you, even though they didn't mean to." I stared at him. "How is being homeless and broke a gift?" "Because now you're free," he said. "You spent 8 years taking care of everyone else, investing in everyone else's future, making everyone else's problems your responsibility. Now you get to build something that's actually yours." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because they were completely true. Losing my home and my family wasn't something I'd ever call a gift, but because there was something in them that resonated. For the first time in my adult life, I had no obligations to anyone but myself. No house to maintain, no family members to consider, no one else's needs to put ahead of my own. "Here's what I'm thinking," Jake continued. "You don't have startup capital, but you have something more valuable. You have nothing to lose. I'll cover the initial investment, but instead of a 50-50 split, we start with 60-40 in my favor. As the business grows and you're able to contribute more financially, we gradually move toward equal partnership." It wasn't the best deal I could have hoped for, but it was fair, and more importantly, it was real. It was an actual opportunity, not just sympathy or charity. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I asked.
I've been planning this for 2 years, he said. I can have us licensed and operational within 6 weeks if I have the right partner. 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, I could go from homeless and unemployed to co-owner of a business. It felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. I'm in. We shook hands across the table, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not hope exactly. I was still too raw for that, but possibility. For the first time in my adult life, I had no obligations to anyone but myself. No house to maintain, no family members to consider, no one else's needs to put ahead of my own. After Jake left to meet with his lawyer about the partnership paperwork, I sat in the diner for another hour, nursing a second cup of coffee and thinking. The breakfast crowd had cleared out, leaving just me and a few other people who looked like they had nowhere urgent to be. That's when my phone rang, Mom's number. I stared at it for 4 rings before answering. Hello? Natalia? Her voice was small, uncertain. Honey, how are you doing? The question was so absurd, so disconnected from reality, that I almost laughed. How am I doing? I know this is all very difficult, she said, and I could hear her trying to sound motherly, caring, the way she used to when I was a kid and had scraped my knee or failed a test. Where are you calling from, Mom? What do you mean? I mean, are you calling from the house? The house where I lived for 8 years? The house that you signed over to Garrett and Penny without telling me? The house where I invested every dollar I had and every hour of my free time? There was a long pause. Natalia, please don't be angry with me. I did what they said was best. What they said was best, I repeated. And what did you say was best? Another pause, longer this time. I just want you to be happy, sweetheart. I was happy, I said, my voice getting sharper despite my efforts to stay calm. I was happy taking care of you, taking care of the house, being part of the family, and now I'm homeless because my own mother signed away my home without even telling me. You still have family, she said, and I could hear her starting to cry. You'll always be my daughter, but I won't always have a home, apparently. Natalia, please. I know this is upset, but this is still your family. We still love you. I closed my eyes and felt something crystallize inside me. Something hard and clear and unbreakable. Mom, I said quietly, if this is what your love looks like, I think I'd rather do without it. I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Voicemail. On the third call, I turned it off completely. I sat there in that diner booth, surrounded by the sounds of normal people living normal lives. The waitress chatting with the cook, a couple at another table planning their weekend, the soft jazz music playing from speakers I couldn't see, and felt the last thread connecting me to my old life finally snap. For 8 years, I had been holding on to the idea that family meant something, that blood relations came with automatic loyalty, unconditional love, shared responsibility, that if I just tried hard enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, I could earn the kind of security and belonging I had always craved. But sitting there with my phone silent and my mother's tears still echoing in my ears, I realized that I'd been working toward a goal that didn't exist. My family didn't want me to be secure and belonging. They wanted me to be useful. And the moment I stopped being useful, the moment I needed help instead of providing it, they had discarded me as efficiently as they would throw away a broken appliance. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. The worst part was the realization that it wasn't really a betrayal at all. To betray someone, you have to first value them. My family had never valued me. They had valued what I could do for them, what I could provide, how I could solve their problems and shoulder their burdens. But me, as a person, as someone with my own needs and dreams and right to security, I had never mattered to them at all. I thought about calling them back, trying one more time to make them understand what they'd done, how much they'd hurt me. For a moment, I even reached for my phone. Then I stopped. Because I realized that they did understand. They understood perfectly. They just didn't care. And that understanding, as painful as it was also liberating. I didn't have to spend any more energy trying to fix relationships that had never been real in the first place. I didn't have to keep sacrificing my future for people who had already decided I didn't have a place in theirs. I could focus all that energy on building something new instead. When I finally left the diner, the sun had come out and the snow that had fallen overnight was starting to melt. As I walked to my car, I caught sight of the local real estate section. There, in a quarter-page ad, was my house. Beautiful family home in desirable Millbrook neighborhood. Move-in ready. $449,000. Move-in ready. Because of 8 years of my work, my money, my care. I bought the paper not because I wanted to torture myself, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted to remember exactly how this felt, exactly what they had done, exactly how little they had thought of me when they made their decisions. Because 6 weeks from now, when I was co-owner of a security business, I was going to start making some decisions of my own. And unlike my family, I was going to make sure my decisions had consequences. 3 days after I'd hung up on Mom, I was sitting in a cramped office above Romano's Pizza, staring at a stack of business license applications that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. Jake had found the space for cheap. The landlord was his cousin's brother-in-law, and nobody else wanted an office that smelled permanently of pepperoni and had paper-thin walls. But it was ours. I was trying to decipher the insurance requirements when the door opened and a woman walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee and a paper bag that smelled like heaven. "You must be Natalia," she said, setting one of the cups in front of me. "I'm Carmen Rodriguez, Jake's sister, and you look like someone who hasn't eaten a real meal in days." She was right. I'd been surviving on vending machine snacks and whatever Mrs. Chen occasionally pressed on me when she thought I looked too thin. The bag contained homemade breakfast burritos, still warm, with real eggs and cheese, and the kind of care that comes from someone who actually knows how to cook. "Jake told me about the partnership," Carmen said, settling into the folding chair across from my desk, which was really just a card table Jake had found at a garage sale. "He also told me about your family situation." I tensed, expecting pity or awkward consolation. Instead, Carmen took a bite of her burrito and said, "Good riddance to garbage people." I nearly choked on my coffee. "Excuse me? Anyone who would make their own family member homeless over money? Garbage people. You're better off without them." She said it with the kind of matter-of-fact certainty that made me believe for the first time that maybe she was right. "Jake also mentioned you've been staying in someone's garage apartment," she continued. "That's temporary, right?" I nodded. "Mrs. Chen has been incredibly kind, but I can't impose forever. My apartment complex has a unit opening up next month. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean and the rent's reasonable. I could put in a good word with the manager if you want." The offer hit me sideways. Here was someone I'd met 30 seconds ago offering concrete help without strings attached, without making me beg or justify or explain why I deserved it. It was such a stark contrast to my family's behavior that I had to blink back tears. "Why would you do that?" I asked. She shrugged. "Because Jake thinks you're going to help him build something good, and I trust his judgment. Because you're working your ass off in this freezer of an office instead of feeling sorry for yourself. And because sometimes people just need someone to show up for them."
She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. "Here's the manager's number. Tell her Carmen Rodriguez referred you. She owes me a favor anyway. I helped her daughter with a job application last month." As she was talking, Jake walked in carrying a box of equipment and looking slightly frazzled. "Carmen, what are you doing here?" "Bringing food to your business partner who's clearly running on caffeine and stubbornness," she said, standing up, "and making sure she knows she's not alone in this." Jake looked between us, then at the empty burrito wrapper on my desk. "She's been trying to feed the entire neighborhood since she was 12, he said with obvious affection. "Fair warning, she's going to adopt you whether you want it or not." "I could use adopting," I said quietly, and meant it. Carmen smiled. "Good, because I already told my kids they have a new Tia to meet."
After she left, Jake and I spent the rest of the morning working through the business license paperwork. It was tedious, bureaucratic work, but there was something deeply satisfying about filling out forms that would make our partnership official, legal, real. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said as we were reviewing the insurance requirements. "Sure. What do you want to get out of this? I mean, beyond just having a job and a place to live." I thought about it for a moment. "I want to build something that no one can take away from me," I said finally. "I spent 8 years investing in something I thought was mine, and it turned out I was just making other people rich. I want to build something that's actually mine, that I control, that reflects my work and my decisions." Jake nodded slowly. "That's good. That's the right motivation." He paused. "But I have to ask, is any part of this about getting back at your family?" The question caught me off guard, partly because it was so direct, but mostly because I had to think about the answer. Was this about revenge? Was I starting a business because I wanted to succeed or because I wanted them to see me succeed? Maybe a little, I admitted. But mostly it's about proving to myself that I can do this, that I don't need them to have a good life. "Fair enough," Jake said. "Revenge can be good fuel in the short term, but it burns out quick. Building something real takes longer and requires different motivation." The next morning, I called the apartment manager Carmen had recommended. Her name was Dolores Vega, and she had a voice like someone who'd spent decades dealing with deadbeat tenants and emergency repairs without losing her sense of humor. "Carmen Rodriguez's friend," she said when I introduced myself. "That girl's got good judgment. When can you come look at the place?" The apartment was a one-bedroom unit on the second floor of a complex that had seen better days, but was clean and well-maintained. The previous tenant had left it spotless, and it came with appliances that worked and heat that actually heated. "First month, last month, and security deposit," said Dolores as we stood in the empty living room. "Normally, I'd want to see pay stubs and run a credit check, but Carmen vouched for you, and she's never steered me wrong." I should probably mention that I'm just starting a new business. I don't have traditional employment verification right now. Dolores looked at me for a long moment. "You're running from the law or planning to cook meth in my building?" "No, ma'am." "You gonna pay your rent on time and not trash the place?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we don't have a problem. Carmen said you're good people who hit a rough patch. We all hit rough patches." I signed the lease that afternoon using the address of Jake's cousin's auto shop as a temporary mailing address until I could update everything officially. Walking out of that rental office with keys in my hand felt like the first truly forward step I'd taken since the night I'd slept in my car. That evening, I was back in the office working on vendor contracts for security equipment when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you're starting some kind of business. Hope it works out better than your family relationships. .M." Penny. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling the familiar mixture of hurt and anger rise in my chest. Then I deleted it without responding. 10 minutes later, another text from the same number. "Mom's really upset about how you talked to her. She doesn't deserve that kind of treatment." This time I did respond. "Lose this number." The phone rang immediately. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. This time, I answered. What part of "lose this number" was unclear? "Natalia, this is ridiculous. You're acting like a child." "I'm acting like someone who's been betrayed by her own family and is trying to move on with her life." "We didn't betray you. We made a difficult decision that was best for everyone. Best for everyone except me." "You're 32 years old," Penny said, her voice getting louder. "You can't live with Mommy forever." "I wasn't living with Mommy," I said, my own voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "I was taking care of her. There's a difference. And I was paying for the privilege of doing it." "You act like we owe you something." "You owe me about $100,000 in 8 years of my life, actually." There was a pause. Then Penny said something that made my blood turn to ice. "You were never supposed to get so attached. It was always supposed to be temporary." I sat there in that cramped office above Romano's Pizza, surrounded by business plans and equipment catalogs and the smell of melted cheese, and felt the last piece of my old life crumble away. "Temporary," I repeated. Dad always said you knew you were just helping out until Garrett and I got established. He said you understood it wasn't permanent. Dad's been dead for 2 years, Penny. He can't tell you what he said anymore. Look, I'm trying to be nice here, but you need to get over this. We're moving forward with or without your drama. Good, I said. Move forward. I am too. I hung up and immediately blocked her number. Then I sat there for a while, not moving, just breathing and letting the conversation sink in. They had planned this. Not just the house sale, not just kicking me out, but all of it. 8 years of letting me believe I was building a future when they had always intended for me to be temporary help. 8 years of taking my money, my labor, my devotion, while knowing they would eventually discard me. The cruelty of it was breathtaking, but sitting there in my tiny office, surrounded by the beginnings of something I was building for myself, something no one could sign away or take from me, I realized something important. Their cruelty had accidentally set me free. If they had been kinder about it, if they had included me in the decision-making, if they had offered me some small piece of the proceeds, I might have stayed trapped in that dynamic forever. I might have continued being the family caretaker, the problem solver, the one who sacrificed her own dreams for everyone else's comfort. Instead, they had been so ruthless, so complete in their rejection, that they had forced me to build something entirely new. I looked around the office, at the business license application waiting for my signature, at the vendor contracts spread across my makeshift desk, and at the photograph Carmen had brought me earlier that day, showing her kids holding a sign that said, "Welcome, Tia Natalia," and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Gratitude. Not for what had happened to me, but for the people who had shown up in the aftermath. Jake, who had seen potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. Carmen, who had claimed me as family before she even knew my last name. Mrs. Chen, who had given me shelter without asking for anything in return. Dolores, who had trusted me with an apartment based on nothing but someone else's word. These people had shown me what real family looked like. Not blood relatives who use love as a weapon or a bargaining chip, but people who chose to show up, who chose to help, who chose to believe in each other's potential. I picked up my pen and signed the business license application with a steady hand. Safe Haven Security Services was officially born. 2 weeks into February, I was finally starting to feel human again. The apartment Dolores had rented me was small, but mine, with a lease that had my name on it and nobody else's. I'd bought a used mattress and a folding table from the thrift store, found a microwave someone was giving away on Craigslist, and slowly began creating something that resembled a life. Safe Haven Security Services was becoming real too. Jake and I had our business license approved, our insurance in place, and our first batch of equipment delivered to the office. More importantly, we had our first 3 clients. Mrs. Chen had insisted on being customer number 1, Carmen had convinced 2 of her neighbors to upgrade their outdated systems, and word was starting to spread through the network of contractors I had worked with over the years. But success, even small success, brought unexpected challenges. Specifically, it brought questions I'd been too busy surviving to ask. I was installing a new deadbolt in my apartment door, old habits from home maintenance dying hard, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I didn't recognize, Thompson and Associates Law Firm. Miss Peterson? This is Linda Thompson. I represent your mother, Dorothy Peterson, regarding the estate of your late father. I stopped mid-turn with the screwdriver. My father's estate was settled 2 years ago. Actually, that's what I'm calling about. There are some irregularities in the probate documents that have come to light, and I need to speak with you about your potential claims to the family property. My heart started beating faster. What kind of irregularities? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Could you come to my office this week? I made the appointment for Thursday afternoon, then spent the next 3 days in a controlled anxiety. Jake noticed my distraction during client meetings and finally cornered me in the office. What's going on? You've been jumpy all week.
I told him about the lawyer's call. It's probably nothing, I said. Maybe just some paperwork that got filed wrong. Or maybe it's something, Jake said. Either way, you should find out.
Want me to come with you? The offer surprised me. It's not your problem. We're partners, he said simply. Your problems are my problems now. Besides, lawyers make everyone nervous. It helps to have backup. Thursday afternoon, Jake and I sat in Linda Thompson's office, which was decorated in the kind of muted colors and expensive furniture that screamed billable hours. Linda herself was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she didn't waste time on pleasantries. Miss Peterson, she began, opening a thick file folder, I've been retained by your mother to handle some complications that have arisen regarding your father's estate. What kind of complications? Are you aware that your father had a life insurance policy through his employer? Yes, Mom used it to pay for his funeral and some medical bills. Linda shook her head. The policy was for $200,000. The funeral and medical expenses came to approximately $15,000. I felt Jake shift beside me. Where did the rest go? That's what we're trying to determine. According to the insurance company's records, the check was deposited into an account that doesn't appear on any of the probate documents. My mind started racing. What does that mean? It means either there was an oversight in the estate proceedings or someone deliberately concealed assets during probate. Linda pulled out another document. There's also the matter of your father's pension fund. According to his employer, he had accumulated benefits worth approximately $60,000 at the time of his death. I never heard anything about a pension fund. Neither did the probate court, apparently. Linda leaned forward. Miss Peterson, I need to ask you directly. Did you receive any inheritance from your father's estate? No, I was told the house was heavily mortgaged and there wasn't anything left after paying off debts. Yet the mortgage balance at the time of your father's death was only $48,000, and the house was appraised at $220,000. The numbers hit me like physical blows. I looked at Jake, who was taking notes on his phone with a grim expression. Are you saying my family stole my inheritance? I asked. I'm saying there are significant discrepancies between what the estate should have contained and what was reported to the court. Linda pulled out another calculator. Conservative estimate, you should have inherited approximately $120,000. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach. $120,000. Money that could have given me a real stake in the business. Money that could have let me buy my own place instead of renting. Money that was legally mine and had been stolen from me by the same people who had later kicked me out of the house I'd been maintaining with my own funds. What can we do about this? Jake asked when I seemed unable to speak. We can request a full audit of the estate proceedings. If we find evidence of deliberate concealment or fraud, we can petition the court to reopen the estate and recover the missing assets, plus interest and penalties. How long would that take? I managed to ask. 6 months to a year, depending on how cooperative your family is with the investigation. After we left the lawyer's office, Jake and I sat in Jake's truck in the parking lot for a long time, not talking. Finally, he said, "Are you okay?" I don't know, I said honestly. I keep thinking I can't be surprised by how low they'll go, and then they find new ways to prove me wrong. It's not just that they kicked you out, they've been stealing from you for 2 years. The anger was starting to build now, hot and clean. Every time I struggled to make a mortgage payment, every time I had to choose between buying groceries and fixing something in the house, every time I felt guilty for not being able to contribute more to Mom's care, they were sitting on money that was legally mine. Are you going to pursue it? I thought about it. Part of me wanted to let it go, to focus on building Safe Haven and moving forward with my life. But a bigger part of me knew that letting them get away with this would be like giving them permission to keep stealing, keep lying, keep treating me like I didn't matter. Yes, I said, I'm going to pursue it. That evening, I called Linda Thompson and authorized her to begin the estate audit.
Then I sat in my small apartment eating takeout Chinese food and trying to process everything I'd learned. The phone rang. Carmen's number. "Hey, how did the lawyer meeting go?" I told her everything. When she finished, there was a long silence. "Mija, your family is something else."
I just can't understand it, I said. If they never wanted me around, if I was always supposed to be temporary, why not just let me have the inheritance and be done with me? Why steal it and then keep me around to pay for everything? Because they wanted the money and the free labor, Carmen said bluntly. They found a way to have both. The simplicity of it was staggering. They had stolen my inheritance and then manipulated me into spending my own money to maintain their property. They had turned me into a source of free money and free labor while making me feel grateful for the opportunity to serve them. "Carmen," I said, "I think I'm really angry." "Good," she said fiercely. "You should be angry. What they did was criminal. I spent so many years making excuses for them, telling myself they were just struggling, just doing their best in a difficult situation. And the whole time they were planning how to squeeze every dollar out of you before throwing you away." After I hung up with Carmen, I sat on my thrift store couch and allowed myself to really feel the rage I'd been suppressing for months. Not just hurt or disappointment, but pure, clean anger at the systematic way they had exploited me. But underneath the anger, something else was growing, a cold, calculating determination that felt almost pleasant in its clarity. They thought they were done with me. They thought they had extracted everything of value and discarded the rest. They had no idea that I was building something of my own, something that would eventually give me resources they couldn't imagine. I opened my laptop and started researching estate fraud laws in Pennsylvania. I read about penalties, about asset recovery, about the ways courts dealt with families who stole from each other. Then I opened a new document and started writing down everything I could remember about the estate proceedings, every conversation, every document I'd seen, every detail about how they had handled Dad's death and the aftermath. If they wanted to play games with money and legal documents, I was going to show them what it looked like when someone played those games properly. I worked until nearly midnight, documenting everything, building a timeline, creating the foundation for what Linda Thompson would need to prove their fraud. When I finally closed the laptop, I felt something I hadn't felt since the night I'd slept in my car. Complete clarity about what I needed to do. They had taught me that family meant nothing. They had taught me that trust was a weakness. They had taught me that the only security came from what you could build and protect yourself. I was about to show them how well I'd learned those lessons. The next morning, I woke up early and drove to the office before Jake arrived. I sat at my makeshift desk, looking at the stack of client contracts we'd accumulated in just 3 weeks of operation, and felt a smile spread across my face. Safe Haven Security Services was growing faster than we'd projected. We had a waiting list of potential clients. We had contractors calling us for partnerships. We had built something real, something valuable, something that belonged to us. And soon, very soon, I was going to have the resources to show my family exactly what it felt like to lose everything they thought was secure. But first, I had work to do. Real work. Building something real with people who had chosen to trust me and support me. The revenge would come later. Right now, I had a business to run. March arrived with the kind of muddy, unpredictable weather that made everyone in Millbrook cranky and impatient for spring. I was in the middle of installing a security system for an elderly couple on Elm Street when my phone buzzed with a text from Linda Thompson. "Need to see you immediately. Found something significant." I finished the installation, tested all the sensors twice, and drove to Linda's office with my heart hammering against my ribs. Whatever she'd found, her tone suggested it was bigger than hidden pension funds. Linda was waiting with another woman I didn't recognize, younger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of sharp suit that suggested she billed even more per hour than Linda did. "Miss Peterson, this is Rachel Kim from the district attorney's office. She specializes in financial crimes." My stomach dropped. Financial crimes? Rachel spoke with the careful precision of someone who spent her days translating complex legal concepts for confused civilians. "Ms. Peterson, in the course of auditing your father's estate, we have uncovered evidence of what appears to be a pattern of systematic fraud extending back several years." Linda opened a folder thick enough to choke a horse. It started with the estate audit, but once we began looking deeper, we found irregularities in your mother's disability claims, your brother's business loan applications, and several tax filings. What kind of irregularities? Your brother listed the family home as collateral for a business loan 18 months ago. The loan was for $80,000. I stared at the paperwork. Garrett's signature, the house address, a loan dated 6 months before Dad died. But he didn't own the house then. Exactly. He used forged documents to claim ownership, obtain the loan, and when your father passed away, they manipulated the estate proceedings to make the false ownership legitimate.
Linda pulled out another stack of papers. There's more. Your mother's disability benefits increased substantially after your father's death, based on claims that she had no other sources of income or family support. But I was paying all the household expenses, which they didn't report. By law, family contributions over a certain amount must be disclosed when applying for needs-based benefits. They essentially defrauded both the insurance company and the federal disability system. Rachel leaned forward. Miss Peterson, we're looking at potential charges of insurance fraud, disability fraud, loan fraud, and conspiracy. The total amount involved is well over $200,000. I sat back in my chair, feeling like I was falling through space. $200,000. And that's just what we found so far, Linda said grimly. We're still working through the financial records. What does this mean for me? It means you're not just entitled to recover your inheritance, Rachel said. You're potentially entitled to restitution as a victim of fraud. It also means your family is facing serious federal charges. The room was quiet for a moment while I processed this. Then Linda said, "There's something else, something that directly affects your current situation." She pulled out a document I recognized, the deed to the house. According to our investigation, the transfer of the house to your siblings was completed using fraudulent documentation. Specifically, they claimed your mother was the sole heir to the property, when in fact your father's will named you as a co-inheritor. My vision actually blurred for a second. I was supposed to inherit part of the house? 50%! Your father's will, which we found in his employer's records, clearly states that the house should be divided equally between his spouse and his daughter, Natalia. But I never saw a will. Because they destroyed the original and filed false documents with the probate court. Rachel's voice was ice cold. We have copies from 3 separate sources: his employer, his insurance company, and his attorney's backup files. I thought about all those nights I'd lain awake feeling guilty about not contributing enough to the household, all those times I'd stretched my budget to cover repairs and payments, all those years I'd believed I was just helping out of the goodness of my heart while they were sitting on legal documents that proved half the house was mine by right. How is this possible? I asked. Don't probate courts verify these things? They rely on the honesty of the family members filing the documents, Rachel said. When everyone appears to be in agreement and the paperwork looks legitimate, courts don't typically conduct independent investigations unless someone challenges the proceedings. And since you trusted your family and weren't expecting to inherit anything, you never challenged it, Linda added. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They had counted on my trust, my assumption that they would treat me fairly, my belief that family meant something. They had weaponized my own decency against me. What happens now? I asked. Now we have choices, Rachel said. We can pursue criminal charges, civil recovery, or both. The criminal case would be handled by my office and could result in prison time for the perpetrators. The civil case would focus on recovering your losses and damages. How long would this take? Criminal proceedings typically take 12 to 18 months. Civil recovery could be faster, especially if we can prove the fraud clearly enough to obtain emergency asset freezing orders. Linda leaned forward. Miss Peterson, I need to be clear about what we're talking about here. If we proceed with this investigation, your family is going to face serious consequences. This isn't just about getting your money back. This is about potential federal prison time. I thought about that for a long moment. 2 months ago, the idea of my family going to prison would have horrified me. 2 months ago, I probably would have declined to pursue charges, accepted whatever small settlement they offered, and tried to rebuild the relationships. But that was before I understood the scope of their betrayal, That was before I realized they had been systematically stealing from me for years, while manipulating me into feeling grateful for the privilege of being exploited. I want to proceed, I said, with everything. Rachel nodded. We'll need your full cooperation with the investigation. Financial records, communications, anything that documents the pattern of deception. I have most of that already, I said, thinking about the timeline I'd been building, and I can get the rest. After the meeting, I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Jake. They stole $200,000, I said without preamble. Jesus Christ! It gets worse. I was supposed to inherit half the house. They destroyed Dad's real will and filed fake probate documents. There was a long silence. Then Jake said, "Where are you right now?" "Lawyer's office parking lot." "Stay there. I'm coming to get you." 20 minutes later, Jake pulled up next to my car and got out. Without saying anything, he opened my passenger door and said, "Get in." "Where are we going?"
Somewhere you can process this without sitting alone in a parking lot. He drove us to a small park on the edge of town, where a creek ran through bare trees and the only sounds were water and wind. We sat on a picnic table, and I told him everything the lawyers had explained. "So what are you going to do?" he asked when I finished. "I'm going to destroy them," I said, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. Jake looked at me carefully. "That's anger talking. Are you sure that's what you want?" "Jake, they didn't just steal money from me. They planned this for years. They counted on me being too trusting, too loyal, too grateful to figure out what they were doing. They turned my own love for them into a weapon against me." I picked up a stick and threw it toward the creek. And the whole time they were doing this, they were making me feel like I owed them something, like I was the one who needed to be grateful. "Okay," Jake said quietly. "Then we destroy them." The simplicity of his support, the complete absence of judgment or attempts to talk me out of it, meant more to me than I could express. "This is going to get complicated," I warned him. "Legal proceedings, media attention probably, definitely drama that could affect the business." "The business will be fine," Jake said. "We're building something solid. It can weather some drama." That evening, I sat in my apartment and called Carmen to tell her what I'd learned. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Mija, I've seen some family dysfunction in my time, but this is something else. The lawyers think they could go to prison." "Good," Carmen said fiercely. "Maybe that will teach them not to steal from their own children." "Are you sure you want to be associated with me when this all comes out? It's going to be messy." "Natalia, you are family to me now, real family. That means I show up when things get messy, not run away." After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the stack of documents Linda had given me. Evidence of fraud, copies of the real will, financial records that told the story of years of systematic theft. In one of the folders, I found a copy of the original deed to the house with both my parents' names on it. Below that, a copy of Dad's real will in his own handwriting, clearly stating his intention that I inherit half of everything. At the bottom of the page, in his careful script, was a note. "Natalia has always been the most responsible and caring of my children. I trust her to do right by the family." I traced those words with my finger and felt something break open in my chest. Not sadness this time, but a kind of fierce determination. He had trusted me to do right by the family, and I was going to honor that trust, just not in the way any of them expected. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning in late March. I was making coffee in my small kitchen, mentally preparing for a busy day installing systems for 3 new clients, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Peterson? This is Detective Sarah Moreau with the Millbrook Police Department. We have a warrant to search the residence at 428 Maple Street in connection with an ongoing fraud investigation. Your family has been asking to speak with you." I sat down heavily at my kitchen table. "They've been arrested?" "Not yet. We're executing search warrants this morning, and they're cooperating with the investigation.
However, they're claiming that you initiated this investigation in retaliation for a family dispute and that the evidence has been misrepresented. I see. Miss Peterson, I need to ask you directly. Are you willing to testify about the financial arrangements you had with your family over the past several years? Yes, I said without hesitation. I'll testify to everything. Good. Can you meet me at the station this afternoon? We'd like to get your formal statement on record. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my coffee cup and trying to process the fact that it was really happening. The house I had lived in for 8 years was being searched by police. The family that had raised me was being investigated for federal crimes. The life I'd spent 30 decades believing in was being systematically dismantled by law enforcement. My phone rang again. This time it was Garrett. Natalia, what the hell have you done? His voice was different from the controlled, condescending tone he had used at the family meeting. This was panic, raw and undisguised. I told the truth, I said calmly. The truth? The truth is that we're family and families work things out privately. You've got the police tearing apart Mom's house looking for documents that don't mean what you think they mean. What do they mean? Everything we did was legal. Maybe not perfect. Maybe we should have communicated better, but legal.
I felt a cold smile spread across my face. Including forging Dad's will? Silence. Including using fake documents to get that $80,000 business loan? More silence. Including lying to the federal government about Mom's financial support to increase her disability benefits. You don't understand the whole situation, Garrett said finally, his voice smaller now. Then explain it to me. Dad was in debt, more debt than you knew about. The medical bills, the credit cards, everything. When he died, we were looking at losing the house anyway. I waited, sensing there was more. The will you think is real? Dad wrote that when he was on all those medications in the hospital. He wasn't thinking clearly. The lawyers told us it wouldn't hold up in court anyway. So you decided to destroy it and forge a new one? We decided to do what was practical, what would actually protect Mom and keep the family together. The words were coming faster now, like he'd been rehearsing this explanation for hours. And the business loan was to invest in home improvements that would increase the value of the property for everyone. The disability thing was just, we didn't realize we were supposed to report family contributions. It was an oversight. An oversight that lasted for 2 years and netted you thousands of extra dollars in benefits? Natalia, please, we can fix this. We can make this right. But you have to call off the investigation. I can't call it off, Garrett. It's in the hands of federal prosecutors now. Then talk to them. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we're willing to make restitution. I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the early morning light hitting the trees behind my apartment complex. Trees that belonged to no one in particular, that existed without ownership or debt or complicated family dynamics. Garrett, I said quietly, do you remember what you said to me that night when I was sleeping in my car outside the house? What? I said I didn't live there anymore. You looked me in the eyes and told me I had no place in your life. That was different. That was about the house sale, not about... It was about me not mattering to you. It was about you being willing to make me homeless rather than include me in decisions about my own life. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. And now that you're facing consequences for the things you did, you want me to matter again. You want me to be family again. But only long enough to save you from those consequences. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Garrett, you stole my inheritance, you kicked me out of my own home, and you spent 2 years collecting money based on lies about my contributions to the household. What part of that was fair? There was a long pause. Then Garrett said something that made my blood freeze. Fine, you want to play hardball, you're not the only one with information. What's that supposed to mean? Mom kept records too. Records of every dollar you spent on the house, every improvement you made. And most of it was done without proper permits, without consulting the other owners, without authorization. My stomach clenched. Other owners? Dad added Penny and me to the deed 3 years ago.
We've been co-owners of that house since before he died, which means every renovation you did without our permission was technically property damage. The words hit me like a physical blow. You're lying. Check the county records. We've been legal owners for years, and we have documentation of over $60,000 in unauthorized modifications you made to our property. I sat down hard on my couch, mind racing. If they had been co-owners for years, then my legal position was completely different. If I had made improvements without permission from all owners, they might be able to argue that I had damaged their property rather than improved it. "You're son of a bitch," I whispered. "Call off the investigation, Natalia, or we'll file charges for property damage, theft of materials, and unlawful modification of a jointly owned residence." The line went dead. I sat there holding my phone, feeling like the ground had shifted underneath me again. Just when I thought I understood the scope of their deception, they revealed another layer. Just when I thought I had legal leverage, they showed me how they'd been planning even further ahead than I'd realized. My phone rang again. Linda Thompson. "Miss Peterson, we've received some documents from your family's attorney that we need to discuss immediately. Can you come in this morning?" An hour later, I was sitting in Linda's office again, this time with Rachel Kim participating by video call from the district attorney's office. "Show me," I said. Linda spread the documents across her desk. Deed modifications from 3 years ago, adding Garrett and Penny to co-owners, property tax records showing all 3 names, documentation of improvements made to the house over the past 3 years with estimated values, and a notation that work was performed without consent of all owners. "Is this real?"
"The deed modifications are legitimate," Linda said grimly. "Your father did add your siblings to the ownership 3 years before he died." "But that doesn't change the fraud in the probate proceedings," Rachel said from the screen. "They still destroyed his will and filed false documents about the inheritance. It just complicates your civil claims." "How much does it complicate them?" Linda pulled out a calculator. "If they were co-owners for the past 3 years and you made $60,000 in improvements without their permission, they could potentially sue you for the cost of restoring the property to its previous condition, even though the improvements increased the value. Legally, they could argue that you damaged their property by making unauthorized changes. It's a stretch, but it's possible." I leaned back in my chair, feeling like I was playing chess with opponents who had been thinking 10 moves ahead while I was still learning the rules. "What do you recommend?" "We proceed with the criminal case," Rachel said firmly. "The fraud charges are solid regardless of the property ownership issues. For the civil case, we might need to adjust our strategy." "Meaning?" "Meaning instead of just suing for recovery of stolen assets, we also have to defend against their potential counterclaims." After the meeting, I drove aimlessly around Millbrook for an hour, trying to process everything I'd learned. Every time I thought I understood the full picture, they revealed another level of planning, another way they've been manipulating the situation to their advantage. But as I drove past the office where Jake was probably installing equipment for our newest client, past the apartment complex where Carmen lived with her kids, past the house where Mrs. Chen had shown me kindness when I had nowhere else to turn, I realized something important. They had been planning this for years, yes. They had been more sophisticated in their deception than I'd given them credit for, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had assumed I would stay the same person I'd always been, the compliant daughter, the grateful family member, the one who absorbed punishment and betrayal without fighting back. They had no idea who I was becoming. I pulled into a coffee shop and called Jake. "How bad is it?" he asked as soon as he answered. "It's complicated. But Jake." "Yeah?" "They just made it personal." The next 3 weeks turned into a masterclass in modern investigative procedure. What started as a simple estate fraud case had expanded into a multi-agency investigation involving the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, the Pennsylvania Department of Insurance, and the Social Security Administration's Fraud Division. I found myself at the center of it all, not as a victim anymore, but as a key witness in what Rachel Kim now described as one of the more sophisticated family fraud schemes her office had encountered. "Most family fraud is impulsive," she explained during one of our weekly meetings. "Someone desperate makes a bad decision and tries to cover it up, Your family planned this systematically over multiple years, involving multiple government agencies and financial institutions. The evidence was staggering. Federal investigators had traced the fraud back 5 years, uncovering a pattern of financial manipulation that went well beyond what we'd initially discovered. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source, Garrett's own computer. Detective Moreau had seized his laptop during the search warrant execution, and the forensic team found a folder labeled Family Financial Planning that contained documents dating back to when Dad was first diagnosed with cancer. "Look at this," Rachel said, sliding a printed email across the table. It was from Garrett to Penny, dated 2 months before Dad's death. P. Dad's not going to make it much longer. Lawyer says if we get our names on the deed now, the house won't go through probate as inheritance. We can handle the transfer privately and avoid the mess with N's claims. Also, if we play the disability angle right with Mom, we could be looking at an extra $800 a month in benefits. N doesn't know anything about estate law, so as long as we handle the paperwork, she'll never question it. I read it twice, feeling sick. 2 months before Dad died, while I was taking time off work to drive him to chemotherapy appointments, Garrett was planning how to steal my inheritance. "There's more," Detective Moreau said, opening another folder. "We found spreadsheets calculating the financial benefit of various fraud scenarios. They actually ran cost-benefit analyses on frauding the government." The spreadsheets were color-coded and professional-looking, like something from Garrett's insurance job. Column headers included risk level, potential monthly benefit, audit probability, and criminal penalty if caught. Under the disability fraud scheme, Garrett had noted low risk if family member contributes informally, N too trusting to report contributions, estimated additional income $9,600 annually. "They commoditized you," Rachel said quietly. "They literally calculated the monetary value of your trust and loyalty." But the most damaging evidence came from Penny's phone records. The FBI had obtained warrants for all their communications, and what they found painted a picture of coordination that extended to the very night they'd kicked me out. Text message thread from December 15th while I was sleeping in my car. Penny, 11:47 p.m. "She's still in the driveway. Think she'll actually leave?" Garrett, 11:52 p.m. "She has to. We changed the locks. What's she going to do? Break in?"
Part of me feels bad. She really didn't see this coming. Don't go soft now. We agreed this was the cleanest way. Better than a messy legal fight where everything comes out. What if she figures out about the real will? How? Dad's lawyer is retired. Insurance company only has copies. As long as we stick to the story, there is no way she finds out. And if she does, then we deal with it. But N's not a fighter. She never has been. She'll eventually move on. Reading those messages, I felt something crystallize in my chest. Something cold and sharp and absolutely certain. They had been so confident in their assessment of my character, so sure that I would absorb their betrayal and eventually move on, so convinced that I was not a fighter. "Miss Peterson?" Rachel's voice brought me back to the present. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said, and meant it. "What else did you find?" The investigation had also uncovered evidence of tax fraud. For 3 years, they had been claiming deductions for house maintenance and improvements, while I was the one actually paying for them. They'd essentially used my money to reduce their tax liability. The total amount of fraudulent tax deductions is approximately $28,000. That's tax evasion in addition to everything else. "What are we looking at for charges?" Rachel consulted her notes. "Wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, disability fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy to commit fraud, and falsification of legal documents. If convicted on all counts, they're looking at potential sentences of 15 to 20 years in federal prison." Federal prison? I sat with that for a moment, trying to imagine Garrett and Penny in orange jumpsuits, trying to imagine Mom visiting them through security glass. "How is my mother involved in all this?" I asked. "That's complicated," Rachel said. She signed documents, she received the fraudulent benefits, but the evidence suggests she was largely following your sibling's lead. We're recommending lighter charges for her, conspiracy and fraud, but not as a primary actor. What does that mean for her sentence? Probably probation and restitution if she cooperates fully with the prosecution. Meanwhile, Safe Haven Security Services was exploding in the best way possible. Word had spread through the contractor network about our reliability and fair pricing, and we were booking installations 3 weeks out. Jake had hired 2 additional technicians, and I was spending most of my time on business development and client relations. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family was being investigated for fraud, I was building a business based entirely on trust and security. It's like the universe has a sense of humor, Carmen observed one evening as we reviewed our books in the office. She'd started helping with our accounting on weekends, refusing payment, but accepting dinner and wine as compensation. How so? They tried to make you homeless and stole your security. Now you're literally in the business of providing security for other people. She was right. Every system we installed, every client who trusted us with their safety felt like a small victory against the chaos my family had tried to create in my life. The other unexpected development was the media attention. Someone had leaked the story to the local newspaper, and it had quickly been picked up by regional outlets. Local family accused of systematic fraud against own daughter was the kind of headline that generated clicks and outrage. I declined most interview requests, but I did agree to speak with one reporter, Maria Santos, from the Pittsburgh Tribune, who had a reputation for covering white-collar crime with nuance and accuracy. "What's the hardest part of all this?" she asked me during our interview at a coffee shop in downtown Millbrook. I said, "The realization that they never saw me as family. They saw me as a resource to be managed. For 8 years, I thought I was contributing to our shared future, and they were treating me like an employee they planned to eventually fire." Do you want them to go to prison? I thought about that question for a long time before answering. I want them to face consequences proportional to what they did. They didn't just steal money from me. They stole years of my life, my sense of security, my ability to trust my own judgment. They made me question my worth as a person. If prison is the legal consequence for that level of betrayal, then yes, I want them to go to prison. The article ran the following Sunday with the headline, "From Homeless to Business Owner, How One Woman Fought Back Against Family Fraud." It was fair, accurate, and absolutely devastating to their reputation. By Monday morning, I had 17 new business inquiries. But the real breakthrough came on a Tuesday afternoon when Linda Thompson called with news that changed everything. "They want to negotiate," she said without preamble. "Negotiate what?" "A plea agreement. They're willing to admit to the fraud in exchange for reduced charges and restitution." I sat down at my desk, looking out at the afternoon sun streaming through our office windows. How much restitution? Full recovery of your stolen inheritance plus interest, plus damages for the unauthorized improvements, plus compensation for legal fees and lost opportunities. Linda paused. They're talking about nearly $400,000. $400,000. Enough to buy a house outright. Enough to expand Safe Haven into neighboring counties. Enough to never worry about financial security again. What would happen to the criminal charges? Reduced, probably 2 to 5 years instead of 15 to 20. Your mother would get probation. And if we don't take the deal, we go to trial, risk everything on a jury verdict, and they could potentially walk away with lighter sentences anyway. I looked around the office that Jake and I had built from nothing, at the client contracts stacked on my desk, at the business license hanging on the wall with both our names on it. "I need to think about it," I said. That evening, I sat in my apartment and called the 3 people whose opinions mattered most to me, Jake, Carmen, and Mrs. Chen. All 3 gave me the same advice, in different words. Take the money, take the victory, and move on with building my life. But as I sat there that night, looking at the photos from Dad that I'd finally hung on my walls, I realized there was something I wanted more than money. I wanted them to understand that I was not who they thought I was. I was not someone who would quietly disappear after being betrayed. I was not someone who could be discarded without consequences. I was someone who fought back. I called Linda Thompson the next morning at exactly 9 a.m. "I'm rejecting the plea deal," I said without preamble. There was a long pause. "Miss Peterson, I want to make sure you understand what you're turning down. $400,000 is life-changing money. I understand perfectly, but they're not offering that money because they want to make things right. They're offering it because they're terrified of going to trial." That may be true, but Linda, they calculated the monetary value of my trust. They literally made spreadsheets about how to exploit my loyalty for profit. A plea deal doesn't address that level of calculated cruelty. Another pause. "What do you want me to tell the prosecutor?" "Tell them we're going to trial, and tell them I want to do something else first." "What's that?" "I want to buy the house." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. "You want to buy the house?" Linda finally said. "The house where all this happened?" "The house they kicked me out of. The house they've been trying to sell for months without success because of the legal complications. The house that's been sitting empty while they can't access any of the proceeds because of the asset freeze." I could hear Linda typing on her keyboard. "Miss Peterson, that property is currently under federal asset seizure. You can't just—" "Actually, I can. I researched this. As a co-owner with legitimate claims to the property, I have the right to force a sale and buy out the other owner's shares at fair market value, especially when those other owners are under criminal indictment for fraud related to the property." The typing stopped. "Where did you learn property law?" "I had a lot of time to read while they were being investigated. The point is, I can force them to sell me their shares of the house for the court-assessed value, minus their debts to me, minus legal fees, minus penalties." "How much would that leave them with?" I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "Based on my calculations, about $12,000 each." "Miss Peterson, that's financial devastation." "Good." Later that afternoon, I met with Rachel Kim to formally submit my property purchase petition to the federal court. The document was thick, professionally prepared, and absolutely airtight. "You're really doing this," Rachel said, reviewing the paperwork. "I'm really doing this. They're going to fight it. Let them try. They're criminal defendants who defrauded the estate to gain ownership of the property. I'm a legitimate owner with documented claims. Who do you think the court will side with?" Rachel shook her head slowly. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were a victim who wanted justice. Now I'm realizing you're something else entirely." "What's that?" "You're someone who plays the long game." The property purchase petition was filed on a Wednesday. By Friday, I was getting phone calls. The first was from Mom, crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Natalia, please, you can't take our house. Where will I live? Where will I go?" "Mom, you've been living in Sunset Manor for 4 months. The house has been empty." "But it's our home. It's where your father and I built our life together."
"It's where you and Dad built your life together," I said carefully. "But you signed it away to Garrett and Penny, remember? You chose them over me." "I was confused. I was grieving. They told me it was the right thing to do." "And what did I tell you? What did I beg you to consider before you made that decision?" Silence. "You had a choice, Mom. You could have included me in the decision. You could have protected my interests. You could have treated me like family instead of like a problem to be solved." "Natalia, I'm your mother." "When it was convenient for you, when you needed someone to pay the bills and do the work and ask for nothing in return." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mom, fair would have been inheriting 50% of the house like Dad intended. Fair would have been consulted before you signed away my home. Fair would have been not being made homeless by my own family." "Please, honey, there has to be another way." There was another way. It was called treating me with basic human decency. You chose not to take it.
I hung up and immediately blocked her number. The second call came from Penny, and she wasn't crying. She was furious. "You vindictive bitch," she said the moment I answered. "You're really going to take the house after everything we did for you?" "Everything you did for me?" I repeated. "Penny, what exactly did you do for me?" "We gave you a place to live for 8 years." "I paid for that place to live. I paid the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, the repairs. I gave you 8 years of free labor and financial support." "You got to live there too!" "Until you decided I didn't deserve to live there anymore. That was business. This is personal." "You're right. This is personal. Very personal. If you go through with this, we'll never speak to you again." I was quiet for a moment, considering that threat. "Penny, you kicked me out of my own home and left me sleeping in my car in December. You've been stealing from me for years while making me feel grateful for the privilege. You destroyed our father's will and lied to the courts about my inheritance. In what universe do you think I want to speak to you again? We're still family." "No," I said firmly. "Family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. You're just people I used to know who happen to share some DNA. You're going to regret this." "I already regret 8 years of putting your interests ahead of my own. I'm not going to regret stopping." The third call was the most interesting. It came from a number I didn't recognize. But when I answered, I heard Garrett's voice. "Natalia, it's me. I'm calling from my lawyer's office." "Congratulations on getting legal representation." "Look, we need to talk, in person. There are things you don't understand about the situation." "Such as?" "The fact that if you force this property sale, you're going to destroy more than just Penny and me. Mom will lose everything. She'll have to live in government housing." "She should have thought about that before she chose to participate in defrauding me." "She didn't choose anything. She's old. She was grieving. She didn't understand the legal implications of what she was signing." "But you did." "Yes, I did. And I'm willing to take responsibility for that." I sat up straighter. This was a different tone from Garrett than I had heard before. "What kind of responsibility?" "Full responsibility. I planned everything. I manipulated the documents. I convinced Mom to sign things she didn't understand. I pressured Penny to go along with it. If you want someone to blame, blame me." "I'm listening." "Drop the property seizure. Let us sell the house normally and split the proceeds fairly. I'll plead guilty to all charges, serve whatever sentence the court gives me, and make sure you get your full inheritance plus damages." "And Penny and Mom?" "Reduced charges, probation, community service. They were following my lead." I thought about this for a long moment. It was actually a reasonable offer. It would get me the money I was owed without completely destroying everyone involved. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm the one who deserves the full consequences. And because maybe, if I take responsibility for what I did, you'll find it in your heart to show some mercy to the rest of the family." "Garrett, do you remember what you texted Penny the night you kicked me out?" Silence. "You said I wasn't a fighter. You said I'd eventually move on. You were so confident that you knew who I was." "I was wrong." "Yes, you were wrong. You were wrong about everything. You thought you could exploit my loyalty without consequences. You thought you could steal from me without retribution. You thought you could make me homeless and I'd just disappear quietly." "Natalia!" "Here's what's going to happen, Garrett. I'm buying the house. I'm taking it away from all of you the same way you took it away from me. And then I'm going to live in it while you serve your prison sentence. That's cruel."
No, I said calmly. Cruel is making your own sister homeless in December because you wanted her money. Cruel is spending years planning how to steal from someone who trusted you. Cruel is calculating the monetary value of someone's love. So this is revenge. This is consequences. There's a difference. I hung up and sat in my quiet apartment for a while, thinking about the conversation. Part of me was tempted by Garrett's offer. It would be easier, cleaner, less emotionally complicated. But easy and clean weren't what I wanted anymore.
I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences. I wanted them to learn what it felt like to lose everything they thought was secure. I wanted them to discover that the person they had dismissed as not a fighter was actually someone they should have been afraid of all along. Most of all, I wanted to go home. Not to the house where I'd been tolerated and exploited, but to the house that would finally, legally, completely belong to me. That evening, I drove past 428 Maple Street for the first time since December. The for sale sign was still there, but it looked weathered now, faded from months of sun and rain. The yard needed mowing. The flower beds I'd maintained for years were overgrown with weeds. It looked abandoned, which I supposed it was, but not for much longer. I pulled out my phone and called Jake. How would you feel about Safe Haven Security Services having a really impressive headquarters? I asked. What do you mean? I mean, what if we moved our operations to a beautiful 4-bedroom house with a 3-car garage that we could convert to a workshop and enough office space for a dozen employees? That sounds amazing, but we can't afford anything like that. Actually, I said, looking up at the house that had been my home and my prison and would soon be my kingdom, we can. The story exploded across social media on a Monday morning in May, 6 months after I'd slept in my car outside the house I was now legally purchasing. It started with Maria Santos's follow-up article in the Pittsburgh Tribune. Fraud victim turns tables. Homeless daughter to own family home after federal investigation. But what made it go viral was the accompanying photo, a side-by-side comparison of me sleeping in my car last December versus me standing in front of Safe Haven Security Services' new headquarters. The headquarters that happened to be located at 428 Maple Street. Within hours, the story had been picked up by national outlets. CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, everyone wanted to cover the homeless Harris story, as one network dubbed it. The comment sections were brutal for my family and overwhelmingly supportive for me. This is what karma looks like in real time, read one comment that received 12,000 likes. She played chess while they played checkers, said another. Family that steals together goes to prison together, added a third. But the real breakthrough came when someone posted the court documents online. The entire fraud scheme laid out in devastating detail across 47 pages of federal evidence. Garrett's emails planning the theft, Penny's text about me being too trusting, the spreadsheets calculating how much money they could steal from disability fraud. Within 48 hours, #SafeHavenStory was trending nationally. My phone rang constantly. Interview requests from every major news program, publishing companies wanting to discuss book deals, documentary filmmakers asking for exclusive access. I turned them all down except for one. 60 Minutes wanted to do a segment on family financial fraud, using my case as the centerpiece. The producer, a woman named Janet Walsh, had covered white-collar crime for 20 years and promised a fair, fact-based story. What interests me isn't just the fraud, she explained during our preliminary call. It's the systematic nature of it. Your family turned exploitation into a business model. The interview was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at the house. My house now, though the paperwork was still being finalized. Janet arrived with a small crew, and we set up in the living room where that devastating family meeting had taken place 5 months earlier. Take me back to December 15th, Janet said once the cameras were rolling. What was going through your mind when they told you the house had been signed over to your siblings? I looked around the room that once felt like a trap and now felt like our victory. Honestly, my first thought was that there had been some kind of mistake, that Mom had misunderstood what she was signing, or that there was paperwork that could be corrected. When did you realize it wasn't a mistake? When Garrett showed me the deed transfer and said, "We're being reasonable, you have until the end of the month." That's when I understood this wasn't confusion or miscommunication. This was planned. How did it feel to sleep in your car that night? I thought about that question carefully. Cold. Physically cold, but also emotionally cold. Like I was seeing my family clearly for the first time.
They weren't the people I thought they were. They had never been the people I thought they were.
You discovered later that the fraud went much deeper than just the house transfer. The house was just the tip of the iceberg. They had been stealing from me systematically for years, while making me believe I was contributing to our shared future. Janet leaned forward slightly. The federal investigation found evidence that they had calculated the monetary value of your loyalty. How did that feel when you learned that? It felt like being treated as a commodity instead of a person. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as a resource to be managed and eventually discarded. And now you own the house where all this began. I smiled for the first time during the interview. I do. And I've turned it into the headquarters for my security company. There's something poetic about building a business based on protecting people in the same house where my own family violated my security and trust. Do you have any contact with your family now? No. They made it clear that I was only valuable to them as long as I was useful. Once I stopped being useful and started demanding accountability, they had no interest in maintaining a relationship. Do you feel guilty about the consequences they're facing? That was the question I'd been dreading, but I'd prepared for it. I feel sad that it came to this, I said carefully, but I don't feel guilty. They made choices every day for years. They chose to steal from me. They chose to lie to me. They chose to exploit my trust. And when they were caught, they chose to blame me for the consequences of their own actions. What would you say to other people who might be in similar situations with their families? Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, investigate it. Don't let family relationships be used as weapons against you. And understand that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you most need protection from. The segment aired 3 weeks later and drew 15 million viewers. Safe Haven Security Services received over 200 new client inquiries in the following week. But the real impact was on the legal proceedings. Rachel Kim called me the morning after the broadcast. "Your family's lawyers want to meet," she said without preamble. "About what?" "They want to discuss a new plea arrangement." I thought we'd moved past plea deals. This is different. They're not asking for reduced charges anymore. They're asking for concurrent sentencing and agreed-upon restitution in exchange for guilty pleas on all counts. Meaning they want to avoid trial completely. They'll admit to everything, serve their sentences, and pay whatever the court orders in damages. I thought about this. What changed their minds? Public opinion. The story has made them into national symbols of family betrayal. No jury is going to have sympathy for them now. How much are they offering in restitution? $600,000. I sat down hard at my desk. $600,000? She didn't blank. The court calculated damages not just for the stolen inheritance, but for lost investment opportunities, emotional distress, legal fees, and punitive damages. $600,000? More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to expand Safe Haven across 3 states, enough to buy a dozen houses. What do you recommend? Take it. You've won completely. They're admitting guilt, they're going to prison, they're paying massive restitution, and their reputations are destroyed. There's nothing more a trial could accomplish. That evening, I sat in the home office I'd created in what used to be Mom's bedroom and called the people who had become my real family. Jake was enthusiastic. $600,000, Nat? We could become the largest residential security company in Pennsylvania. Carmen was more cautious. Are you sure you're ready to be done fighting them? Mrs. Chen, when I walked over to tell her in person, just smiled and patted my hand. You've proven your point, dear. Now it's time to live your life. But it was a call from an unexpected source that helped me make my final decision. Detective Moreau called me just before 9 p.m. "Miss Peterson, I wanted to give you a heads up about something." "What's that?" "Your case has been getting attention from other law enforcement agencies. We've had 3 other families come forward with similar fraud complaints, all citing your story as inspiration to speak up." Other families? Adult children who were exploited financially by relatives.
People who had inheritances stolen, families who were manipulated into providing free labor and money under false pretenses. Your case is helping other people find justice. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my house, and realized something important. This was never just about me. It was about proving that people don't have to accept being victimized by their own families. It was about showing that trust can be rebuilt, that security can be reclaimed, and that sometimes the best revenge is living well. The next morning, I called Rachel Kim.
"I'll take the plea deal," I said. "Good choice. The sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month. Will I have to see them? Only if you want to give a victim impact statement." I thought about that. Standing in front of Garrett and Penny and Mom, telling them exactly how their actions had affected me, making them hear the truth they'd spent years avoiding. "Yes," I said. "I want to give a statement." "What do you want to say to them?" I looked around the house that was now the headquarters of a thriving business, the home I'd built from the ashes of their betrayal, the proof that their assessment of me as not a fighter had been the most expensive mistake they ever made. "I want to thank them," I said. "Thank them? For showing me who I really am." The federal courthouse in Pittsburgh was nothing like the small-town courtrooms I'd seen on TV. Everything was marble and mahogany, with the kind of imposing architecture designed to remind you that justice was serious business. I sat in the front row of the gallery, wearing the navy blue suit I'd bought specifically for this moment. Professional, confident, successful. Behind me, the courtroom was packed. Media, supporters, other fraud victims who'd been inspired by my case, and even some of my new clients who'd driven down from Millbrook to show support. Carmen sat directly behind me with her hand on my shoulder. Jake was on my left, wearing the best suit he owned, and looking like he'd rather face a dozen angry customers than one federal judge. At the defendant's table sat the three people who had once been my family. Garrett in an ill-fitting gray suit, thinner than I remembered, staring straight ahead. Penny in black, her hands folded tightly in her lap, occasionally glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't read. And Mom, looking smaller and frailer than I'd ever seen her, wearing the same dress she'd worn to Dad's funeral. Judge Catherine Morrison was a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen every type of fraud case imaginable. She reviewed the plea agreements with methodical precision, asking each defendant to confirm their understanding of the charges and their voluntary acceptance of guilt. "Mr. Peterson," she said, addressing Garrett, "you are pleading guilty to wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, disability fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Do you understand that these charges carry a maximum sentence of 25 years in federal prison?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Ms. Martinez, you are pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud, disability fraud, and tax evasion. Do you understand these charges carry a maximum sentence of 15 years in federal prison?" "Yes, Your Honor." Penny's voice was barely audible. "Mrs. Peterson, you are pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and accepting fraudulent disability benefits. Do you understand these charges carry a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison?" Mom's answer was so quiet I couldn't hear it, but the court reporter nodded. Judge Morrison looked up from her papers. "Before I accept these plea agreements and proceed to sentencing, I understand there is a victim impact statement." Rachel Kim stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The victim, Miss Natalia Peterson, would like to address the court." My legs felt unsteady as I walked to the podium, but my voice was clear when I began to speak. "Your Honor, my name is Natalia Peterson, and for 8 years I believed I was part of a family. I paid their mortgage, maintained their property, cared for their mother, and sacrificed my own financial future because I thought we were building something together." I looked directly at Garrett, who finally met my eyes for the first time since December. What I learned through this investigation is that I was never family to them. I was a resource to be exploited. They calculated the monetary value of my loyalty, my trust, and my love.
They turned my devotion into a business plan. Mom was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. The defendants stole over $200,000 from me directly, but the real damage was deeper than money. They stole my sense of security, my ability to trust my own judgment, and my belief that family meant unconditional love and support. I paused, looking at each of them. On December 15th, they made me homeless. They watched me sleep in my car in freezing weather rather than admit what they had done or include me in decisions about my own life. They left me with nothing but the clothes I was wearing and the car I'd been sleeping in. The courtroom was completely silent. But what they didn't understand is that they had also given me something else: complete freedom. Freedom from obligations to people who didn't value me. Freedom from trying to earn love that was never really available. Freedom to build something that was entirely mine. I turned to face the judge directly. Your Honor, in the 6 months since I learned the truth about their fraud, I've started a successful business, created a real family of people who chose to support me, and bought the house they tried to steal from me. I've discovered that I'm stronger, more capable, and more resilient than they ever gave me credit for. Now I looked back at my former family.
Garrett, you texted Penny that I wasn't a fighter, that I would eventually move on. You were wrong about everything. Penny, you told me on the phone that I was acting like a child. Children don't build businesses and win federal fraud cases. Mom, you told me I would always be your daughter. The daughters don't get abandoned in hospital parking lots and made homeless by their own mothers. I took a breath. I don't want revenge anymore. I want recognition. I want the court to acknowledge that what they did was criminal, not just a family disagreement. I want other people in similar situations to see that you don't have to accept being victimized by your own relatives. And I want them to understand that their assessment of me as weak and compliant was the most expensive mistake they ever made. I looked at each of them one more time. I forgive you for not loving me the way I loved you. I forgive you for seeing me as a resource instead of a person. I even forgive you for making me homeless and trying to steal my future. But I will never forget that when I needed family most, you showed me that blood means nothing without loyalty, respect, and genuine care. I turned back to the judge. Your Honor, I request that the court impose sentences that reflect the seriousness of their crimes and send a message that family relationships cannot be used to shield financial predators from consequences. I walked back to my seat on steady legs, feeling like I'd left something heavy at that podium. Judge Morrison was quiet for several minutes, reviewing documents and making notes. When she looked up, her expression was grave. In 30 years on the federal bench, I have seen many cases of financial fraud, but few that demonstrate such calculated exploitation of trust and family relationships. The defendants didn't just steal money, they weaponized love itself. She looked directly at the defendants. Mr. Peterson, you are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will pay restitution in the amount of $280,000 to the victim. Garrett's shoulders sagged, but he didn't react otherwise. Ms. Martinez, you are sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. You will pay restitution in the amount of $180,000 to the victim. Penny put her head in her hands. Mrs. Peterson, considering your age and health conditions, you are sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release. You will pay restitution in the amount of $140,000 to the victim. Mom made a small sound, like air being let out of a balloon. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, the defendants are permanently barred from serving as financial agents, trustees, or beneficiaries for any family member. The court finds that they have demonstrated a fundamental inability to separate financial gain from family relationships.
She looked at me. Miss Peterson, the court recognizes your courage in pursuing this case and your resilience in rebuilding your life. You have transformed victimization into empowerment, and your example will undoubtedly help other families facing similar exploitation. As the marshals led them away, Mom looked back at me one last time. I thought she might say something, but she just looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Something that might have been respect or regret or recognition. Garrett didn't look back at all. Penny stopped at the gate and turned toward me. "Natalia," she called out loud enough for the whole courtroom to hear. I looked at her. "You were right," she said simply, "about everything." Then they were gone. Outside the courthouse, Carmen hugged me so hard I thought my ribs might crack. "It's over, mija. It's finally over." Jake was grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Did you hear that total? $600,000 in restitution. We can expand to 3 states with that kind of capital." Mrs. Chen, who had driven down with Carmen despite being nearly 80, just patted my arm and said, "Your father would be proud." But the moment that mattered most came when a young woman approached me as we were walking to our cars. "Miss Peterson, my name is Lisa Chen, no relation," she gestured toward Mrs. Chen. "I saw your story on the news, and my brothers have been stealing from my grandmother's estate, and I've been afraid to do anything about it because they're family." She held out a business card. "This is my lawyer's number. I called him yesterday and filed a complaint. I wanted to thank you for showing me that family doesn't have to be a trap." As I took her card, I realized that this, helping other people find the courage to protect themselves, was worth more than any restitution check.
That evening, I sat in my home office at 428 Maple Street, looking at the business license hanging on my wall. Safe Haven Security Services, it read, protecting what matters most. I opened my laptop and began typing. My name is Natalia Peterson, and this is the story of how I lost my family and found myself. I was writing a book, not for revenge, not for money, but so that other people would know that family betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a better one. Outside my window, the security lights I'd installed illuminated the yard I now owned completely. The house that had once been my prison was now my fortress. The family that had tried to erase me had instead helped me become exactly who I was meant to be. Strong, independent, unbreakable. And most importantly, home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.